Well, a very good day to everybody watching this. My name is Paul. I'll be your tour guide from Best Walking Tours. This is a recorded session of one of my live tours that I tend to do every Sunday evening at 7:30. So if you want to ever watch live recordings, please just contact me at bestwalkingtours.org. Right, so I'm just going to share the screen here and get this up. And we'll just go from the beginning. So it's a good place to start. So this week's tour is on Chelsea. Okay. Chelsea Flower Show, which is what I've highlighted here in the first sort of um, image, will be taking place, but a little bit later this year on 21st of September. They're going to extend it and sort of keep with parameters of how many people they can join in and so on. But if you want any other details of other exhibitions they'll put on, because they tend to do them at Hampton Court and places like this, just visit the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society, and you can check out all their details online. So, Chelsea. We're back to London. Last week's tour, we went off to Canterbury. But tonight we're going to have a walk around Chelsea. We're going to do the usual, how it began, why it sort of stretched out in this area, which we're getting a pretty good idea. You know, London stretches out to the west because the prevailing wind pretty much uh, blows all the bad smells and stuff over the city of London eastward. So that's why all the rich folk decided to move westbound and started really spreading out in the early 17th century then into major developments. We're going to look at the Irish connection. There is a big one for Chelsea, so I'll have a little look at that as well. And then I focused on four exceptional ladies who sort of propelled their given field. So were involved in the world of literature, one Victorian, one 20th century. One lady did a lot for medicine and advancements of that. And the final one, fashion, because Chelsea and the King's Road is um, a lot to do, or has a lot to do with the fashion world. So that's what we'll be looking at. Okay. Normally, if you've been watching my sort of latest tours, I start off with this map of London, but we're not heading to London straight away. We're going over to the west, to the island of Ireland. Now, it has been split into two countries since the 1920s and partitions. So you have Northern Ireland, and then you have the Republic of Ireland, okay, to the south and west of Northern Ireland. Um, you'll hear me talk about Ireland and Irish. It's because the first person I'm going to talk about, the Irish connection, was born when it was just one country, Ireland. So we'll focus down on Killalay. Right, so we have Killalay down here, and this body of water to the right hand side, to the east side, is the Irish Sea, and then the darker stretch of water is Strangford Lough. Killalay in this sort of region is also known as Lochiel, and it's one of the most fertile areas of the island for planting crops and so on, which is why it was settled or planted by Scots under the sort of uh, orders, I suppose, of King James the Sixth of Scotland, who would eventually become King James the First of England after the death of, for want of a better word, his cousin Elizabeth the First, who died in 1603. So when the planters came across, eventually they would get the title sort of Ulster Scots, especially if they were in the area now known as modern day Northern Ireland. And one of the connections to Chelsea was the son of an Ulster Scotsman who was an agent for a baronet who owned land around this area of Killalay. Whenever the father passed away, his children were looked after by the baronet, taken in as sort of wards and given quite good education. So a couple of the brothers went off to excel in different fields in law and in medicine. We're going to be looking at the doctor. So here's little Killalay. It's a lovely little village. You see the countryside just on the outskirts and the sort of main through roads. But here, down in the bottom right hand side, where I've highlighted, is a square. And if you're from the area, Killaloe, you might know what this square is called. You may not. You might recognize the statue, however. So lovely little cottages behind it, and then the statues of a gentleman called Sir Hans Sloane. Sir Hans Sloane was born in Killaloe. Not a high ranking, not an aristocrat, nothing like that. But like I said, once his father and mother passed away, taken under the wing of the current baronet at the time. Excuse me. And so basically, he went into the field of medicine. At the age of 24, he was a member of the Royal Society. Later on in his life, he would succeed Sir Isaac Newton as the president of the Royal Society. At the beginning of his uh, uh, physician's career, he was sent off to Jamaica, and he worked for the governor of Jamaica. So quite a high position at that time in the late 17th century. And basically, he was fascinated by the flora and how plants have medicinal purposes. So he really went hard in studying them and understanding them. But where he made his fortune was really by the fact that he was looking at local women. And he noticed how that the local women were mixing cocoa with milk, and this was to settle their stomachs. So he took this recipe, sort of tinkered with it a little bit, brought it back to England, and would sell it to Cadbury as sort of milk chocolate, a drink. And he earned a fortune from this. So that's where his wealth came from. He carried on exploring, and basically, at the end of his life, he had a private collection of around 71,000 artifacts, which upon his death he had left to the British government in the guise of the National History Museum, the Science Museum, and the Royal Society. Now, that was the foundation of the British Museum, essentially, which would open a little bit later after his death. But we'll go from Sloane Square, or Hans Sloane Square in Killaloe, to Sloane Square in London. Quite a different beast altogether. The bigger buildings, it's busy, it's got lots of shops. There's a big department store just to the left of the photograph, Peter Jones. You've got a theatre at the end here, the red brick building. And you've got Sloane Square Station all covered up with scaffolding at the end of the photograph on the right side. So if you are planning a trip to Chelsea, this is a good station to hop off at, okay? Because once you come out of the station, you just walk straight. You keep Peter Jones department store on your right side, and that's you on the very King's Road, which we'll be looking at later on as well. So that's pretty much the big Irish connection. Many of the streets around here are called Sloane Street or Sloane Crescent. Initially, when he developed the land, he bought a lot of it from the Cheney family, who were a big family during the reign of Henry VIII. And so he was able to develop, or people would develop later on his land and so on. He built himself a big house. But it was known as sort of Hanstown for a while. And so unsurprising. So he was wealthy, he was well connected. And then next step, obviously, develop a bit of land. His daughter, upon his death, would marry into the Cadogan family. So around this area as well, you'll see many streets like Cadogan Place, Crescent Avenue, etc. And they're another big aristocratic family as well. So here's a map we're familiar with. If you're just watching my first video, you can contact me. I can give you links to the other videos as well. I always point out this map because it's a good orientation point. We've got the City of London over to the right. And as you come from the city westbound, the Big Bend in the river lets you know the Big Ben from the House of Parliament. It's on the corner here. That little M is Westminster Station. Then you've got St. James's Park, Buckingham Palace, Green Park, and Hyde Park. And then Mayfair we looked at in one tour, Soho, Pimlico, and sort of the City of London as well. But we're going to focus on the west side here, which is the area of Chelsea. So, Chelsea. Basically, it goes from Chelsea Bridge here. This is Battersea Park. And it goes all the way down to sort of Battersea Bridge out of shot here. And then we're going to sort of basically walk down along the Chelsea embankment. We'll turn right. We'll head up Beaufort Street. We'll learn all about the name there. And then we'll go along the King's Road here, back up to Sloane Square. And there is a statue of Hans Sloane. It's not in Sloane Square itself, which is just here highlighted with a red circle, just a little bit down where you see the statue gallery is. This is basically it. He has a couple of statues around. Now, when Hans Sloane married, his wife was a widow, and her late husband had left her a sugar plantation. With that came slaves. So when Hans married into that family, he inherited the plantation and the slaves as well, which is why, especially in the British Museum, where he's not considered the founder, but his collection based the foundation of the museum. He used to have a bust in quite a prominent position, but it's now been moved to a different gallery, explaining all sort of the connections of Hans Sloane with the slave trade as well. Okay, so here's our sort of less cluttered map of Chelsea. So we're going to begin our little tour as we walk down from Chelsea Bridge here, and then go to what is known as the Bull Ring. It's basically a turning circle, but it gives you a wonderful view of the Royal Hospital Chelsea, which is this building. Now, the Royal Hospital Chelsea was sort of the brainchild of this king. We've met him before, King Charles II. Basically, he was the merry monarch who had his wife, the Portuguese princess, who became Queen Catherine of Braganza, who introduced tea to England and so on, or made it popular, certainly. Um, but he had countless mistresses, one of whom was Nell Gwyn, who we met on the Pall Mall talk. And he, Charles II, when he came back on the throne, at this time in the late 17th century, soldiers who were injured or who were too old for service were normally looked after as much as they could be by religious foundations. So there was sort of a cry for the state to actually get involved and to help out. So rather than pay a direct pension to the soldiers, he would commission this building here to house soldiers then who were single, who had nowhere else to go, no living relatives, etc. And he commissioned a very famous architect. We've met this guy before as well, Sir Christopher Wren, who helped rebuild the city of London after the Great Fire of 1666. So they built this, and it housed originally 456 soldiers, or ex-soldiers, pensioners, and they get the affectionate name the Chelsea pensioners, these jolly chaps here. And actually a little pub not too far away from the hospital called the Rose and Crown, where you often see these guys. When they're on the property, they can wear civilian clothing, but whenever they leave, they tend to wear these beautiful scarlet tunics, then their uniform. So that's how you'll recognize them as you're walking around the streets of London. I'm guessing these guys may not come out until, lockdown eases up again. So yeah, Chelsea pensioners. Also, where the Chelsea Flower Show gets held on the premises. If we look back on the map, Ranelagh. This I would pronounce it Ranelagh, but Ranelagh apparently. The gardens, they were pleasure gardens, just like Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. So people, big entertainment, hot air balloons, so on. They fell out of favor in the Victorian period, the Industrial Revolution, and so on. Basically, people were using the trains more and more to escape to the countryside and stuff like that, or especially aristocrats who would head off to Europe and so on for holidays. But that's why they fell out of favor. There was a beautiful rotunda building on the premises, but it's been destroyed. But you can look up artist impressions of it. Right. So from there, we'll go back to some more gardens. Hans Sloane, remember how interested he was in medicinal purposes of plants? So he had a bunch, well, he had 4 acres originally for the Chelsea Physic Garden, who he would eventually give in perpetuity to the Worshipful Company of Apothecaries, who deal with this type of study of plants. And it actually has I'll just go back to the map here for a second. Because it's on the River Thames, it's south facing, so it gets the sun for all the day, and then until the sun sets in the west. It's got a brick wall built up around it, so it actually has this wonderful little microclimate, which allows them to grow plants there that may not survive elsewhere in the UK. The Linnean Society often uses it. The Linnean Society is one of the oldest botanical societies in the world. I think I mentioned them briefly when I was talking about the Royal Academy in Mayfair. So yeah, let's have a little look at it. And we'll start off with this wonderful unfocused photograph. Then we've got another statue of Hans Sloane. There he is, off in the distance. This physic garden is open to the public. So if you're interested in gardening, definitely go down. They've got free tours. Or sorry, no, you pay to go in. Sorry, forget that. But you can go in and have a guided tour around the garden. So especially if it's a really nice area to explore. But if you're interested in plant life, definitely check this one out in Chelsea. Okay, so from here, we'll walk further on down the embankment and we'll get up to what is known as Cheney Walk. Now, remember the name Cheney? So Thomas Cheney was a warden for Henry VIII. In fact, Thomas was around and in power for all of the Tudor kings and queens. He didn't outlive Elizabeth, but he was there for Henry VII coming on, Henry Tudor, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and then Elizabeth. And then he would pass away in 1658. So he had built up a big country manor down in this area. Years later, over 100 years later then, the family weren't so powerful, but Hans Sloane had sort of risen up, so he started to buy land around this area and develop things like the Physic Garden and so on, Sloane Square. But this area then gets turned into a residential area, especially at the period we're about to look at for the Victorians, because this is one of our ladies. Okay. Now, I'm still standing when I take this photograph pretty much on the main road. The Chelsea Embankment and Grosvenor Road, Millbank, very busy roads. Basically a ring road around London to get people east to west. But amazingly, when I was standing here, I noticed that the traffic didn't sound so loud. So I turned around and took this photograph. And it was simply because of these few trees and bushes here. It really did dampen the sound of the traffic, because I was wondering, why on earth would you want to live here? Now, obviously, in the Victorian period, when the next person in my story lived here, wouldn't have been traffic like this. Okay, it would have been horse and cart, which can be equally as noisy. But if it was soft pass, maybe not as much modern day cars and trucks and ambulances and so on. So here at Cheney Walk, we have this blue plaque for a novelist, as you can see here, George Eliot. Now, George Eliot worked on some newspapers and then decided that George would start to write some novels. So what George did was send out his early novels, a couple of stories, to prominent writers of the day, people like Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, Tennyson, so on. And in fact, Charles Dickens, who read the work, sent George a letter via the publishers and basically said how much Charles admired George. He starts off the letter, "Dear Sir, I hope you don't take offense that I'm writing in such a manner to show my admiration for your insight into the human mind and the way that you've elevated the craft of literature," and so on. He goes on. You can look up the actual letter. I haven't memorized it, I'm just paraphrasing. So who was he writing to? Well, he was writing to George Eliot, but here is a picture of George Eliot. Yes, Marianne Evans, who became Marianne Cross, took up the pseudonym, the pen name of George Eliot to be respected. She knew, and women were writing novels in the Victorian period under their own names, but they were often pigeonholed. So basically, that meant that they were sort of, unless they were writing very light-hearted little romantic tales and fairy tales, people weren't taking them seriously. But Marianne was having none of this, so she uses the name and creates the guise of George Eliot, sends the books out, and then gets the response. Now, they're not studies, people love these two characters, George Eliot and Charles Dickens, wondering if they were rivals or possibly lovers. But in 1858, when Dickens wrote that letter, starting its "Dear Sir," there are instances and evidence to show that George, or Marianne here, had met Charles Dickens earlier in 1852. So we don't know if that's just a sort of Charles, you know, just saying. But he was also going through a publisher or her publisher, but they're not quite too sure what the relationship was. But Virginia Woolf of the Bloomsbury set from the early 20th century said that Marianne, or George Eliot, was the only author who was writing adult books for adults. You know, so very high praise from Virginia Woolf. So that's George Eliot. Her first 1,500 books that her publisher decided to print sold like pretty much straight away because she had been sensible and sent it off to these esteemed writers, and they were all singing the praises of George Eliot. So she did make quite a good living. And then she also had a bit of an affair later on with another writer. A couple of her books, The Mill on the Floss, Middlemarch, and so on, just if you want to have a little look at some Victorian literature that isn't Dickens. Okay, so we'll head down from Cheyne Walk just a little bit further and we'll carry on down. And you'll see one of the other reasons why Chelsea developed in the way that it did. So, 16th century with Thomas Cheney, and then this next person, this is all sort of countryside still. So they decided to build their big properties right next to the river and so on. Little villages were around in this area as well, and then obviously they would develop and so on. But it was with these two big characters that the area really sort of gets credibility, is maybe the right word. More and more, you know, wealthy people, as they were stretching out later in the century to follow, would, you know, come here knowing of the history and so on. So this guy was very important. Here's a statue, quite an impressive statue, and it is of Sir Thomas More, or More. Sir Thomas More famously wrote Utopia. He was a devout Roman Catholic. He helped Henry VIII. He rose up through the reign of Henry VIII, but he also fell under Henry VIII as well because of his response to Henry's act of supremacy and the idea of dissolving monasteries. But Thomas More is standing outside, his statue is standing outside Chelsea Old Church, which is actually where Hans Sloane is buried. And around this area, just to the left, he built this manor. So this is a very grand house. And he basically called it Beaufort House. That was due to sort of showing a sign of respect, I suppose, to the king. If you ever want to sort of get in with the kings and queens, you name things after their family, you know, hoping that the building's going to last or some remnants of it will. So Beaufort was the name of Henry VIII's grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, who actually was the legitimate heir to the throne, or their link to that legitimacy when they were fighting the War of the Roses. So yeah, he called it that. So you had Sir Thomas More on one side and Henry VIII on the other. They fall out, but then he calls, before he falls out, he calls his manor after Henry's grandmother here in the center, Margaret Beaufort. Okay, so we're going to walk away from the river now, and we're going to head up Beaufort Street here, just to the left of the red dot, and that will take us just here on this corner to the King's Road. Okay, so we're going to turn right, but as we do, you will see this building. So this is the Bluebird Cafe restaurant. I'm sure they're happy that people can sit outside and dine now because they've got a wonderful sort of outdoor space. But this is a listed building. It's Art Deco in style. It opened originally in 1923 as a car garage. Okay, so they would sell cars here and manufacture cars here as well. It was the largest in Europe, around 50,000 square feet, plus an additional sort of 7,000 square feet for workshops and so on. They would have buildings on either side of the garage, and they would actually split them up or segregate them for different people. So the ladies would have one to wait in, the gentlemen owners of cars would have another room to wait in, and then the chauffeurs would have a separate area to wait in as well. They were picking up cars or calling in for repairs and that type of thing. Alexander Campbell is linked to the Bluebird. He was the guy who set the sort of our land speed record. He was also tied to Chrysler, and Campbell's sort of ethos was that he would never spend his own money. Why do that when you can spend other people's money? So he was never actually an investor here. He just linked his name to it as a racing car driver and got paid by them and so on to advertise and that type of thing. Alexander then very sneakily, after Bluebird went under and people lost thousands, he didn't lose any, but he had set up a small garage in Brooklands, which is a famous racetrack of the day. And it was actually a lot more successful, I think, because he kept it sort of small and knew what he was doing. But like I said, it was converted then after Bluebird sort of had to fold. It was a whole different things. In fact, Sainsbury's actually took hold of this building. It was for their concept of an actual grocery shop on a large scale, but they pulled out of it then. And then someone took it over and made it into a cafe restaurant with a couple of shops on the interior as well. So that's Bluebird. It's very noticeable as you get to the end of the King's Road. So we'll carry on up, but just to show you the size and how the King's Road changed. So basically, I'll highlight one end, we have Sloane Square Station. At the other end, we have the end of Beaufort Street, where the Bluebird was. And that's pretty much the main King's Road area that most people would recognize. You can go a little bit further down on the Cremorne estate, just to the left. But that's what people would consider, especially for the shops, the restaurants, and the sort of fashion stuff as well. But it didn't start out that way. And so that's what it was. If we were actually, I know it was zoomed in there, but we're zooming out a bit. So I'll just throw up Sloane Square and Beaufort Street once more. But the original King's Road would have started up here, sort of at the end of Lower Grosvenor Place, modern day Lower Grosvenor, and Buckingham Palace Road. Buckingham Palace in the late 17th century was not there, okay? John Sheffield, who would build what is Buckingham Palace now as Buckingham House, that happened in 1702. So the palace of the day was St. James's, which we talked about in Pall Mall. I'll pull up a photograph of that later on. But it's just basically straight through Buckingham Palace Royal Gardens here, and then up on the Pall Mall. So basically at the top of the screen. But Charles II, who's the king who commissions King's Road, does this sort of at the request of Nell Gwyn, his mistress, because she wanted an easier way to travel down to the Fulham Palace, which is all the way down here on the left-hand side of your screen, where it says Putney Bridge and Bishop Park. Because Fulham Palace was not strictly a royal palace, it was used by the bishops of London, like Lambeth Palace nowadays used by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and so on. And rather than having to get on the River Thames near Big Ben and then sail down on a royal barge all the way down, which would take forever, they wanted a quicker road just to sort of bypass that. Once the king realizes that, or once people realize that this is what the king's doing, then more and more people start to spread out to this area because it's got to be safe, right? You know, the king's traveling there. So he must have got rid of the highwaymen and the footpads, the criminals of the day who used to wait out at the edge of the city limits just to hold you up in your horse and carriage. So this is another big reason why it was taken over in such a way and why it developed. And that was the full length of the King's Road. In fact, it would eventually go all the way out to Kew Palace as well, which is on the south side of the River Thames here in Richmond Park. Okay, so modern day. Oh, sorry, I'll throw up here actually a few photos. We've got St. James Palace. So Nell Gwyn lives down here on Pall Mall. And then this is an artist's impression of Fulham Palace, the Bishop of London's residence, and all the way down to Kew Palace and another royal residence in Richmond Park. So modern Chelsea. I took this photo because hey, there's a nice building across the street. Then I realized what it actually was. So the flowers got my attention here, the way it's sort of been faced or dressed. But it's just an estate agent. But that's what Chelsea does. It just sort of flowers are a big link Physics Garden, Royal Chelsea, or the Flower Show, Royal Chelsea Hospital. So yeah, a typical street. Georgian style housing here. Easy way to spot Georgian houses. I think I talked about this when I touched on sort of Belgravia. Is you look up the top. If the windows are tiny at the top and then get bigger down, then it's typically Georgian, and it has to do with servants. So at a time when servants were very much a thing, they would all live up in the top in the attic with the smallest windows, don't need much light. Children with nanny would normally live on the next floor down. Then the master guest bedrooms would be here. Then the main receiving rooms, reception rooms, salons, libraries, studies, etc., would be on the ground floor with basements normally for kitchen access. And then Chelsea is full of little squares as well. Sorry, just 1 second. So basically, because of the lack of being able to build and have private gardens for every single property, especially when a lot of properties in these days as well were split into split level apartments, so they created these communal gardens then. You will see shops like this one, which I've already heard about recently, Anthropology. It seems to be a very expensive store for random unique items and things like that. Fashion, interior design, all that type of stuff. Pubs. You will find pubs in Chelsea. And yeah, this is quite a nice little pub here. And there, well, if this one's not open because of the lack of outdoor space, but pubs in London do have outdoor space, as well as restaurants, have been open since April 12th. These guys will be able to get up and running May 17th. Then you got the town hall. So the town hall, it was originally Chelsea Town Hall. Now it is a registrar's office for people to get married in. Some famous weddings have taken place here. Pierce Brosnan, an Irish actor, he got married in this town hall. Judy Garland got married here as well. Wallis Simpson married one of her husbands here as well. And here's the full length of it. So you have this neoclassical style at both ends, and then this sort of more modern section in the middle. And when I was taking these photos, a wedding taking place. So that was on Friday. So nice to see people who get out and about then. These guys sort of followed me for a while, walking down because they were looking for nice places to take photographs as well around the Chelsea area. This building, yeah, this is a pizza place. Why not, eh? This is the old Pheasantry. Okay, so it was a nightclub before it sort of became the Pizza Express in it. And it was very, very popular at a basement nightclub. Before that, it was a ballet school. Leo Tolstoy had students here or recruited students from here. And the name, the Pheasantry, gives an indication to its original sort of purpose because this was a guy who used to breed specific types of pheasants and so on, would sell them in pairs and so on to country estates and whatnot. But yeah, it's a lovely building, and I completely do not mind that it's a Pizza Express now, because whenever you get a company like that going into a building, at least it gives it a bit of security that it's not going to just simply be demolished and replaced with more modern buildings and so on. So that's quite nice, the Pheasantry. Okay, so we're going to head up to Smith Street now. We'll zoom in here. The second of our four ladies of Chelsea. She's another writer. She was Australian British. Her grandfather was a premier in Australia, I think in Queensland, and she, by all accounts, was set up to have quite a nice life. Her father, sadly, was a bit of an alcoholic, and he was a bank manager and took the family away from the security and stuff of the big cities and out to sort of rural Australia. Bit of a tough childhood by all accounts, but she says this led her to have this wonderful imagination, which she wholeheartedly says that she got from her father. She actually took on her father's name. So, like George Eliot, she changed it, but she kept a lady's name. So, first name Pamela, which she changed, but her surname then she used her father's Christian name, her first name, and became known. Here she is on the left as P.L. Travers. So yeah, Travers was his first name, and she took it on to remember him. So, as you can see here from the blue plaque, she was a very famous author of Mary Poppins. Um, that went on to be a great success. There's actually a really nice movie. Tom Hanks and Emma Thompson portray Walt Disney and P.L. Travers. Basically, it's showing a bit of the life of the younger P.L. Travers, and how then when she grows up and she writes this novel, Walt Disney sort of recruits her, wants to secure the rights to Mary Poppins, and they're sort of back and forth on how that would come to be. But it did, of course. And then here we go. So yeah, the penguin's one of P.L. Travers' big fears. This animation in this story of mine. No, you can't do that. But eventually she gave in to it. And Dick Van Dyke down at the bottom, who people say has one of the worst put on English or Cockney accents ever on screen. But it's a lovely movie. Got New Lease of Life with Mary Poppins Returns as well a few years ago, played by Emily Blunt. And we put on the West End as well, and it's back in the West End at the Prince Edward Theatre. So yeah, I think I put up a photo of that. Now here's our third lady, again Australian, but worked for the British military in the form of a nurse. She became the most decorated nurse in the military at the time. And here's a picture of her on the left. And she worked with the army through the Boer Wars in Africa, and then during the First World War. And the whole time, she was instrumental in the First World War by training nurses for the first time to use anesthetics. So they became female anesthetists for the very first time, First World War. Then she also identified the mental anguish that soldiers faced during the First World War. So she was able to separate soldiers that had self harmed and tried to realizing that, a lot of them weren't doing it just to try to get out of the army, but they had this inner turmoil that she recognized and was trying to help as well. Before that, shell shock was the common diagnosis for people who were said to be cowards as well. Cowardice was a diagnosis, and not a great one, especially with the terrors of the First World War. So she did a lot for medical advancements then as well. So that was her house we were looking at, and here's her blue plaque. So Dame Maud McCarthy then, matron in chief by the time this First World War ended, and then retired, I think, about 5 years after that. Okay, so the next one, Joe the Juice. And you'll notice here a green plaque. So I constantly tell people, and you guys have seen it a lot, with blue plaques. Blue plaque, green plaques, brown plaques. They're all doing the same thing. They're all pointing out a famous person who lived either in the particular building or on a building on this site. The blue plaques tend to be scrutinised a bit more because they're looked after now by English Heritage. Originally, the London County Council and the Greater London Council, then it was handed off to English Heritage. Basically, anybody can put up a plaque, right? Okay. All you have to do is two things: get the permission of the owner of the property and the permission of the local council. Sometimes they won't put them up. English Heritage, for example, have a rule where they'll put it up a one in a particular area so they don't dot, every single building that John Lennon ever visited, that type of thing. And that's typically the way most stick to. Okay, so it doesn't matter if brown, green, or blue. Just look at them, read them, and you can be fairly certain the person who's gone to the trouble of getting it up there has done the research. So this is our fourth lady. The lady has everything to do with design. Mary Q. Here she is, Mary Quant, also known as Barbara. 91 years old now. She's Welsh born, but had everything to do with fashion and putting London back on the map at the forefront of fashion again. With these styles of dresses and the mini skirt, making fashion fun for youngsters and freeing and so on, telling them just have fun with your fashion, it's your identity, that type of thing. So yeah, she has big exhibitions. You often see her around in various fashion galleries, museums, that type of thing. The Victoria and Albert Museum had a huge Mary Quant exhibition, 2019, I want to say, yeah, before lockdown. That was on at the V&A, and yeah, London has a lot to do with fashion. Obviously, people think of like New York, London, Milan, Paris. The catwalk, well, that was a London thing. Okay, admittedly an American thing, but basically it was set up in a department store known as Selfridges up on Oxford Street. It was set up by Mr. Harry or Gordon Selfridge. You may remember the TV show that was done a few years ago, and his designer Lucille basically said that it would be great if my dresses didn't look lifeless on these mannequins. So can we get some of your shop girls to maybe put on these dresses and we'll sell tickets and stuff like that? And Harry went with the idea. And yeah, had champagne, made an evening off it, and the catwalk was born in Selfridges on Oxford Street. It's a multi-billion pound industry, as you can imagine, worldwide, and it does a lot for British economy nowadays as well. Right, so here's a couple of things. I just want to show you this lovely vista. So this would have been another sort of parade route. It's called Parade Square, and parade grounds down to Royal Hospital Chelsea once more. So all laid out during the time of King's Road being developed by Charles II. Then the 1690s, the hospital opens, and this would have been a parade route down to it for the king as well. The Saatchi Gallery. Saatchi Galleries for surrealist artists and so on, and contemporary art and this type of thing. Not open just yet, but they're getting ready. May 17th. They'll open with the likes of the National Gallery, the Tate Modern, Tate Britain, and so on, as long as everything goes to plan. And they have been running virtual tours online. So if you're interested in the Saatchi Gallery, by all means, go onto their website and have a little look. And they have these, segways. So those things with the big wheels, and people would stand and lean forward and move before the electric scooter came about. They had sort of robotic automated ones that you could log on to and then have cameras on and take yourself around the gallery. So you check that out. The Hans Sloane statue that I took a photo of and showed you at the beginning is just to the left, just where that puddle of water and the guy's cleaning the area. It was just over there on the left side. And then from here, you're basically at the end of the King's Road. You're heading into Sloane Square. You got Peter Jones, the big department store. As far as I'm aware, nothing to do with the famous dragon from Dragon's Den, a very wealthy Peter Jones. Was he telecommunications or something he made his fortunes in? But it brings us back then to Sloane Square. So it's a really nice walk around those two areas of London. Remember, if you are paying a visit and you're using public transport, you can get the Circle or District line from many major stations around London and hop off then at Sloane Square station. So that's the green or the yellow lines. And then go and explore and have fun. So basically, that's the end of the tour for Chelsea. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let's see, what have we got here? Oh, yes, so far again, £605 we're up to for the RNIB. So thank you very much for that. As always, follow or leave a review on Facebook and my page, Best Walking Tours. Follow me on Instagram, Best Walking Tours. Next week, we're off to Southwark. The reason I've done that is because as I was looking over my tours, I realized that they're all fairly wealthy, affluent areas of London. So I wanted to try to get to a different style of district. Southwark developed because it was the area on the south side of London Bridge. Remember, for centuries, there was only that one bridge across the River Thames. So that's why Southwark began. But it's got some great stories of Shakespeare, the docks, lightermen, the ladies of the night, bishops and kings, the liberties that were all around that area. So it should be a fun one and an interesting one. But yeah, we'll do that next week then. It's been an absolute pleasure. Just got to stop sharing the screen here. And yes, enjoy the rest of your week. Until next time, take care.